Well, hello, and welcome to today's podcast. My name's Heavenly Leanne Akers, and I will be your host. So, many of you know me from my makeup tutorials and various projects that I do on YouTube, as well as a bunch of other things. But you can find all that information on my website at heavenlyleanne.com. But today's topic, we're going to be talking about a various amount of stuff. And like it's going to get interesting. If you have any comments or anything that you would like to mention, you can go to the podcast website and join the group on there and have a live chat with me as well as all of the other listeners and those that are a part of the show. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is family law and true crime, and that's kind of like a guilty pleasure of mine, but also a really deep experience. As many as you know, on my other podcast, What Really Happened, it's about family law and it's about my own personal experience. Now, I am not by any means an attorney or a lawyer. However, as given my own personal experience and the ups and downs of family law, or even those that are in a divorce with a minor child, I do have some advice that I would love to give my listeners. And maybe you can give this advice to other people that are currently going through it. And these are things that you can learn about relatively on your own if you would like to. However, firsthand experience, I wish I would have known somebody that could have given me this information before it happened to myself. After dealing with more than one attorney and now coming to the attorney that I now call my dear friend, her name is Amanda Sullivan, and she was in the podcast What Really Happened. And that podcast, although it's only 6 episodes and the 7th one will be coming relatively soon, it goes through the twists and turns of everything I went through in family court, dealing with somebody that's very controlling, has narcissistic issues, and etc. And I think that also too, it underlines the knowledge that cisgendered men can also be victims of domestic violence. And I think relatively a large portion of society is aware that domestic violence can look like one of multiple things. It could be verbal, physical, even downright violent. And that's also kind of physical. However, there's multiple different levels of domestically violent relationships or even abusive relationships. You have the abuse of the overall amount of narcissism, emotional abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, love bombing, and it goes on and on and on. And these are some of the things that I want to talk about whenever it comes to especially raising children coming from a relationship dealing with narcissistic either parents or a parent. And there is an overwhelming amount in society of adults today that grew up with either narcissistic mother or a narcissistic father. And if you have, woken up to this, if you realize this, you understand the hurdle of how it affects your day-to-day life, the things that, it imposes on you emotionally. It affects how you have relationships romantically or platonically. And even with a child like my own son that is 5 years old, I have noticed a dramatic amount of stuff with him. And now keep this in mind if you have not watched or even listened to What Really Happened or In the Hot Seat on YouTube. My son was taken from me at 3 months of age, and he was alienated from me for 18 months. And during that time and period, it is purely speculation, but it makes incredible sense that my son was made to believe that his father, aka me, was a horrible person, or quote unquote the bad guy. And I will tell you this now, that when dealing with a child that's been alienated, it's not fun. um, your child will have incredibly horrible trust issues for a very, very long time to come until they're old enough to sit back and evaluate the situation for themselves. And they realize that they were either, quote unquote, lied to, or quote unquote, manipulated, to believe that the other parent is bad. And that is inherently heartbreaking. It's devastating. I've had sole physical custody for a very long time now, since September of 2022. And even before I had sole custody, my son and we had a very touch and go relationship. And what I mean by touch and go relationship is there was times that you could see in relapse in judgment that he would open up to me, that he would be vulnerable, that he would be excited to be around me, or even to see me. And then there is other times where he did not want to acknowledge me. I remember in the very early stages, and this relates to, when you're dealing with a child with parental alienation, especially a young child. Okay. Older children, because there's two different forms of alienation, and we'll get into that here in a second. And with my situation, there's covert alienation, and then there's blatant alienation. And covert alienation looks similar to this. And let me give you an example. So let's say that your child comes home, from spending time with mom or dad or whoever, and you, as the parent picking up your child, you look at your child and you go, oh, did your mom or dad feed you? Did you sleep well? Did your mom or dad have anybody over? Asking these kinds of things, this inherently tells your child, well, my parent must not trust my other parent to feed me, or this, or my parent must not trust the other person not to allow other people that they trust around me. And eventually, this child starts to question the ability of their safety around the other parent. And that's covert parental alienation. And in a lot of cases, this is difficult to prove. And this is why I highly suggest, and in a lot of the situations with people that I know of personally, that I'm friends with, or have looked at their cases, to give them advice, especially if I start seeing discrepancies inside their case, where I'm going, hey, your attorney hasn't done this, your attorney hasn't done that. I'm not intentionally trying to make that attorney's job difficult, but there's so much stuff in the legal system that not every attorney is going to use the full extent of their knowledge or education to do what's necessary. But in my situation, we had blatant alienation. And what I mean by blatant alienation is intentionally and purposely taking the child away from the other person. Intentionally and blatantly telling the child, your dad is a bad person. Your dad is taking you from me. Your dad does not want you around me. This is blatant parental alienation, and this is something that is like blatant on the face. You literally, it's night and day. It's right then and there. And then there's the covert, which is what I gave you an example of. And from my experience raising a child with blatant parental alienation, is that it causes an immense amount of distrust. And as a result, your child may not see you as their parent. They may not even respect you as well as most children should. They, there's a, now I guess any parent can kind of say, well, what do you mean by like respect, right? Well, example, like if I say, hey, I'm setting boundaries in my house, like, hey, these are your chores, or hey, can you please not do this? Like, these are boundaries. And as a result, because your child has very lack of trust with you, or even sees you in a negative light because of the parental alienation, the child may disrespect may intentionally, in some cases, not do as they're told. And some people could be like, well, they're young, or oh, well, they're just testing boundaries because you're blah 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 blah, because that's what kids do. A lot of people, in a lot of cases, I think a lot of people need to understand that, like, my experience being a first time parent um, is going to be drastically different from a lot of other people's experiences. And if you're lucky to have married somebody, or not married somebody but met somebody, had a child with them, and raised that child together, you are incredibly lucky, because your child will have a quote unquote normal experience growing up with both of their parents. Um, and and if even if you're two people that were married, you had a child, and you said, you know what, we don't want to be married anymore, we both agree on it. um we just want to have a week on, week off as children, 50-50, whatever, blah blah blah. And your child still has a decent growing up experience, where your child has equal time with both parents, and they enjoy their time, and both parents are co-parenting really well, they have a good co-parenting schedule, they're both a part of the child's life, the activities, school activities, etc. That's amazing. Holidays, etc. That's amazing. But not everybody's situation is going to be that way, and that's the devastating part about it. And yes, eventually we will get into the situation of, hey, how do you, as a person going through divorce of the minor child, or even child custody, come to an understanding that one's actions not only may affect yourself and the other, but also is affecting the child. And that situation, a lot of people, especially like even myself in the beginning, or even other people, you don't want to hear that. Like, nobody wants to hear that, hey, you know your feelings, you know although they are extremely valid, but your feelings are affecting your behavior. Your behavior is now affecting your case, and it is also indirectly affecting your child. And we'll get into that here in a second, because I don't want to jump around too much, because I do have a tendency of doing that. It's part of having ADHD. But anyways, on the other side, I digress. So, in a situation where you have a child with parental alienation, I have experienced quite a bit. And what I mean by quite a bit is, my child, from the very beginning, through some of the therapist that he has had, has said, hey, he has a tendency of lying. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course he does. I mean, what else do you expect? Since the very beginning, when both me and Mandy were witnessing child neglect and child abuse, um, he was indirectly being told by his mom, don't let daddy take pictures of this, don't tell daddy this, don't tell daddy that. So inherently, you're telling your child to lie. And so he's learned from a very young age, to hide, sneak, and lie. And, I can't necessarily be mad at him for this, right? He's learned this dealing, with the process of, his mother, and she had her alternative motives and whatever she was thinking or whatever she was going through at the time, and also dealing with court and etc. But, he's indirectly has learned these negative attributes and behaviors as a result of parental alienation, and as the result of the other parent. And I can't be mad at him for that, right? Like, I can't necessarily look at him and be like, oh, this is all your fault. It's not. And, at the same time, any person could say, well, you could be mad at, the other parent. Well, but I'm not, because there's, I had no place in judging somebody else's behavior and their actions. However, but when those actions and that behavior does start to directly affect a child or another person, then we start crossing over into a line of abuse and issues, mental harm, and etc. And that's not okay. I think we can all agree that when somebody else's behavior or mental health starts affecting a child or somebody else's life and behavior, then that's not okay. It's just not how it should be. However, you know, I deal with this not on a daily basis, and I wouldn't say it's on a weekly basis either, but there is times where, I do look at my son, I'm just like, kiddo, like, I feel like you're trying to pull the wool over my eyes. Like, I feel like you're trying to fool me, but it's not working. And neither do I say this, but it's just like, wow. Like, I feel so, in a sense, like bad for my child, and heartbroken because this wasn't how I wanted my child's life experience to be, right? Like, I wanted my child to have both of his parents. I wanted him to have a very happy and grown up experience. My father was never in my life. So clearly, I wanted that for him to have both of his parents. And that just wasn't in the cards because, I can't change somebody else's behavior. I can't change somebody else's mental health. I can't change the things that they're doing. And eventually, the judge had to make the final order. However, um, you know, from my personal experience to anybody else, if you are the friend of a parent dealing with a child with parental alienation, if you are a parent with a child with parental alienation, I would have to say I commend you 100%. I need to tell you, because if nobody has told you this before, I will be the first to tell you this. You are brave and you are strong, and you need to remember this every single day. And you will go through ups and downs. You will wonder, what have I done wrong? You'll blame yourself. And even if you don't blame yourself, because I know I have, and everything, like, I have had a roller coaster of emotions. And this is just something that, like, it's okay. It's fine. It's gonna be okay. Like, things will get better. Um, and if you're dealing with a teenager with parental alienation and they are just completely unruly, they want nothing to do with you, they, etc. Like, I know it hurts. I know it does. And things, I'm not going to glorify the whole idea of it's going to be okay, because I think a lot of people are kind of, they're overhearing that. But I will say this: everything has a beginning and everything has an end. It doesn't stay that way forever. But, you know, on the other side of it too, is that, you know, children are not children are not an extension of ourselves. And I learned this a long time ago. And I thought to myself, my child's going to grow up. He's going to have wants and needs and likes and dislikes of his own. And he's not at all an extension of me. He is his own entity. He is his own person. And at some point, he is going to have this aha moment. And he's going to have this big realization moment. And that happens with a lot of people. That happens with, almost everybody. Everybody has that aha moment at some point in their lives, right? Even if it looks like a midlife crisis, just like, at some point, it's an aha moment. Um, Everything that happens in life, we all learn from it. And everything's a learning experience. Everything happens for a reason. I tend to use that phrase a lot. Everything happens for a reason, everybody. It's okay. It's going to be okay. Um, but I would also like to mention, too, that, like, hey, in a later on episode, we're going to be talking about some of the things to look for when you're hiring an attorney. When you're hiring an attorney and your attorney is starting to file motions and documents and paperwork, there's certain things that you need to be looking for, because the way I look at attorneys is attorneys are like cars, right? Okay, and there's two different ways to look at this. There's the financial aspect, and then there's the whole quote unquote evidence aspect. Attorneys are like cars. If they don't have evidence, they don't move for you. If they don't have money, they don't move for you. And there's a lot of things that go into that, and I definitely want to talk about that in a later on episode. And I also want to continue talking about how inadvertently your emotions affect your behavior, and inadvertently also affect your court case. And a lot of that ties into mediation. And I think that is kind of an eye-opening situation for a lot of different people, because mediation is definitely standard practice whenever it comes to most court cases. And we will definitely get into that because that is a very, very, very in-depth situation. I will tell you now it is. But other than that, I hope that you have enjoyed today's podcast. If you can, please share this with your family and friends. And if you have any questions or anything that you would like to say, please come on over to the podcast website, join the group, and chat away with me and everybody else. And I will see you in the next episode. And if you haven't, check out What Really Happened on Apple Podcast, as well as In the Hot Seat with me and Amanda Sullivan on YouTube. All episodes are currently airing, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Ta-ta!